We're here at Milking Yard Farm just near Woodend on this beautiful sunny day, having a picnic. I'm reading my favourite book at the moment, Camp Leichhardt by Greg Barron, and we're eating some of Australia's tastiest chicken grown right here on this farm. We're going to do a little interview with Darren Doherty and talk about some of the concerns that the clients here have.
The main concerns that I'm trying to address are the feed issues. This property produces pastured broilers, heritage breed, they're the Sommerlads breed, and a fair portion, in fact around about 70% of their costs are in importing feed onto this farm. So we're looking at installing a range of tree crops and shrub crops which will provide different falling food over the year. We've just finished designing that in the last month, and that'll be installed this year. And they'll be at wide spacing, so you'll have about 20 metres in between each row, so you'll have these alleys of trees and then pasture in between in which the birds go down in there as they get moved through their rotations. The other thing that takes care of things from, say, a perennial feed drop perspective, but we're also looking at trying to get it so that we produce some cereals, because most of the feed that these animals need comes in the form of grain legumes and cereals. So we're running an experiment with the new prototype Regrarians Super that we've developed and have been developing since about 2006. And this machine is sowing directly into these perennial pastures a mixture of winter wheat or red wheat and field peas. We've gone for a very simple mix to start with. The reason being that we just didn't want to get too elaborate in something that was completely untried on this property. So doing that, we'll then come back, hopefully everything will grow, and we'll come back later in the year with some vintage PDO headers that we've purchased that were built here in Australia back in the late 60s. And those machines will strip the crop, which will then be put into silos here, into storage, and then that will supplement the feed that we've got. So it's very much an experiment. Certainly in days gone by, a lot of cereal producers used to have pigs and chickens to deal with their spent grain and low-grade grain, feed quality material. That's changed, of course, with the industrialisation of omnivore production. And here we are on some of these smaller properties still trying to address the same issue. How do we fill that omnivore, and how do we fix the problem of what I call the problem of the omnivore, in that they are very, very efficient feed producers. They have a relative short cycle as far as from breeding to the table, but you do need to import feed in order to be able to, you need to supplement their feed in order for them to be commercially viable. So we're trying to address some of those issues for our clients, and Bruce and Ros have been good enough to work with us in trying to solve these issues. So I think what we should do is go and have a look at the machine that we've developed, the Regrarians Super as we call it, and this prototype, and just see how it works and how it's working on this site, and how it might work on other sites as well, in directly drilling and subsoiling at the same time a range of cereal and grain legume crops. What we've done here, this looks like we've just gone through with the subsoiler. And what we found over the years is that subsoiling by itself, it was difficult to reconcile the economic value of doing that. Sometimes you'd get, in a year or so, you'd get an obvious increase in pasture, or the place would, as farmers would say, would hang on a little bit longer. It'd stay greener for a bit longer because you're infiltrating so much more water than what you would if the soil is compacted. But it was really indifferent. And so the challenge for me in trying to address that, because taking compaction out of the land is clearly a good thing, because it does enhance plant growth, but to really make sure that the producer got that money back, because it's not a cheap thing to do, it can be $100 a hectare or more to do subsoiling, was to combine the subsoiler with a seeder and do it all in one pass. So we've been working on that for years, and just last year our colleague and client and friend Jason Hagan of McIvor Farm Foods, he put some Acra double disc openers on the back of our yeoman's plough while we were overseas, and that really cracked the code for us, because finally we had a really good method of delivering the seed into the ground. So we've got the yeoman's plough, combined that with a seed box, which we've bought locally in this case, and then we've mounted these second-hand no-till drills on the back, and you can see the result here. In the case of this property, because the sod is so thick, we're actually sowing the seed directly behind the yeoman's plough. You can see here, this is a volcanic loam, and we're ripping to about 8 inches, and as the ripper goes through, it's actually leaving a really nice tilt behind it. Some soils that wouldn't work to sow directly behind, and typically when you've got that type of soil which has got not as good a structure, you don't get as thick a sod. And so we typically will move the seeders so that they're on either side of the rip line in what we call the kill zone, because when you subsoil like this zone through here can die or be set back, and that gives the opportunity for the annual seed crop, crops that we're sowing, gives them the jump on everything else. G'day, Bruce.
G'day, Des. How you going, mate?
Yeah, good, mate.
Good.
Good to see you. Long time. So here we are at Milking Yard Farm, and Bruce and his wife Ros produce some of Australia's best chicken. They produce the Sommerlads breed of heritage broiler and or meat bird. And Bruce, we've got the Regrarians Super Seeder or Ripper Seeder here. Why are we doing that for you? Why are you doing that here for yourself?
Well, there's one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest costs that we face, particularly growing organically, is the cost of feed. We have to cut our feed thousands of kilometres to get it here. Even then, organic feed produced the way it is right across the country, and in fact in most places of the world, is produced by ripping up the ground and turning it over and killing the biota and everything in the ground to do that. And we're not prepared to continue in that vein. We really need to make sure that if we're going to produce organically, we produce sustainably as well. So, this is an incredible experiment for us. It's a real milestone and a leap forward that we can not only produce it right on site, but we can produce it in a sustainable way that we're not going to, ruin the soil for future generations.
And we can leverage too, because we can leverage some of the feed that you have brought in, because one of the great things about a broiler is how much nitrogen and phosphorus and calcium they put down on the ground. Yeah. So your animals have been over these sites, and so we can mop up some of that nitrogen and use it to feed these crops.
Absolutely, feed the crops, and then hopefully we won't end up with the typical over fertilisation of some of those elements over time, and just use it for that year or two that it does last in the soil, that big flush of nutrients.
Yeah. And the other thing that's an issue is intensive farming legislation. And so being able to demonstrate and do it in a financial way, that you are providing more than 50% of your feed on farm is another big thing that a lot of small producers in this omnivore space are struggling with.
Absolutely, that's a huge leap forward. There are big changes coming, and for us to be able to do that, really sets us up well to avoid, the traps of intensive classification.
Yeah. So how many chickens are you producing a month?
We produce about 100 a week.
100 a week,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you do that all year round with
All year
these
round.
birds?
Yeah, all year round.
And you've got some forest over there that was put in years ago. I think it was designed by a friend, Hamish McIvor.
It was indeed.
Yeah, way back when.
Yep.
And it's a Tagesasti and acacia and oak forest predominantly, and the chickens spend a bit of time in there.
Yeah, they love it in there, Daz, and that was really the whole inspiration for the future of this property. So not only are we, treating the soil sustainably, but we're going to migrate back to the natural habitat for the chicken, Gallus gallus, which is in the forest. So the massive tree planting, and we've got thousands more trees to go in this year, thanks to your efforts. Are really going to create not only more food for the chooks throughout the year, but also give them the habitat which they're really accustomed to and they really thrive in.
Because this is as far from the jungles of Southeast Asia as you can get. We're right on the top of the Great Dividing Range. Basically there's nothing stopping the winds coming from Antarctica here, and so it does get cold. You do get snow here.
We do.
Not every year, but pretty well.
Pretty much every year.
And that's the type of snow that hangs around for a day, but a lot of cold wind. We can see, this is our prevailing wind direction this way, and there's no shelter at all.
No.
So we're going with north-south orientation. People will notice that these rows aren't on any keyline orientation.
No.
The property doesn't have the kind of undulation that that suits that, but also our biggest focus is shelter and trying to get solar access into these alleys.
Correct. And we don't have the type of soil that really requires that deep ripping and keeping the water on contour as well.
I mean, you've got beautiful soil. It's beautiful young volcanic soils, the type of soils that a lot of people don't associate with Australia. Right. Deep, fertile, young soils which are mineral rich. So the plough here, at the front here we've got the yeoman's plough that we bought in 1994, and we've used all over southeastern Australia, particularly predominantly doing tree ripping and tree preparation for forestry plantations and olives and vineyards, etc. What we've done is we've created this experimental mount beam, as we call it, which allows us to mount onto the back of the yeoman's plough this gang of double disc openers. In the case of these are made in Kansas. They're made by Shield Equipment, and these are what's called Accra double disc openers. So the way these work is these two discs here open up the ground, which in this case is already opened by the yeoman's shank, and then there's this tube which comes from this seeder, and the seed comes down, and you can just see in here some of the seed that's been dropped in the hole there. And then this wheel comes behind, which has got downward pressure, which is moderated by this spring, and that pushes the seed, so the seed gets good soil seed contact, and it's buried in a nice little niche, 1 to 2 inches deep. Now, if you look just here, you can see that the yeoman's has got the coulter in front of it, and then it comes along and it leaves a bit of a wake of soil behind it as it runs through. So it's got, and that wake of soil is what this goes into. As I explained on some other sites that we work on, what we do is actually have 2 of these closer together, and we tried that here, didn't we, Bruce? But the problem was that the sod is so thick that these double disc openers would maybe just ride on top of the grass as opposed to penetrating. They're not designed for this type of thing. They're designed to go into ground that has been, well, not necessarily ploughed, but it has had, the last crop has been an annual crop. Right. or all of the grass has been sprayed out in a no-till system. So this is what we're trying to do here, is trying to grow cereals organically, which has always been a big challenge. And as you said before, people have always used cultivation as the primary tool for weed control, but we're trying things a bit differently here.
Yep.
This seed box that we've got here, this is made locally as well. So we've made this frame locally. These here aren't, they're from Kansas, but we can get these locally as well. We're probably going to use the John Shearer double disc openers from South Australia. This here is made literally 20 kilometres away by Mike Fix at Fix Engineering. It's a beautifully made box, not cheap. We're looking to make our own with the Regrarians model that we will release soon, but does a really good job and is super solid and much better than pretty well any of the others that are on the market at the moment. How we have this work is the depth wheel for the Yeomans. We've welded on a little bit of this 17mm hex on here, and then there's a chain drive inside, and then it's a prototype. So just while we're getting things going, what I've done in order to be able to get this to work, I've just got a 17mm socket, and we've welded an extension onto there, and a little lug of this 17mm hex again, and that's enabled us to connect the drive wheel through this chain and then drive the seeder. So this spins. This here adjusts the seed rate, and these fluted rollers, they spin, and the seed, which you can see inside there, it feeds down through here. And so the more of that fluted roller is in there, then the higher the seed rate. At the moment, we're sowing at about 50 kilos to the hectare, and that goes down here and into the row. We're sowing at about 2 meters of width at a time here, which we could probably go wider, but again, for a prototype, this is what we're working with. Do you have anything else to say about what you're looking forward to here, Bruce?
Looking forward to seeing germination rate.
Yeah, well, germination. We've had a pretty good season as far as we've had early rain, so there's good moisture, but the next step will be we love these days to be able to do this in the middle of May. Absolutely. Soil's still warm. Yep. Well, you're half stripped off, so it's all looking good. And what we'll have is some rain pretty soon, and then things will jump out of the ground. We'll be really looking forward to seeing that happening.